Welcome back to our studios here in Barbados and in Geneva for the second of today's panel discussions. Maggie, can you give us an introduction?
Thank you very much, Winston. What an interesting afternoon. Amazing conversations, and there's obviously still continuing. I just want to remind everyone we're live in Geneva and in Barbados, but also all over the world. Some panelists will be joining in remotely from different parts of the world, sending in questions. What an exciting afternoon. And I have to say, I am live at the Palais des Nations. So beautiful. And obviously, we would have loved to have everyone around, but because of circumstances, beyond our control, like the COVID-19 pandemic, couldn't have everyone here with us. It's such an interesting session that we are building upon from transitioning to green energy now to mining. And the surge in renewable energy technologies would definitely drive the demand for minerals and commodities that are also required to manufacture these new technologies. It is important that the countries endowed or blessed, depending on where you're coming from, with these commodities benefit from this energy transition. And demand for specific minerals is also expected to rise at rates never seen before, exposing the sector of renewable energies to potentially disruptive market tensions. And we have different panelists today who will look at the many factors that will need to be considered as this new market unfolds. I'm personally very keen to hear some of the recommendations that we will get because it's such a new sector and so many opportunities as well, but also challenging. So it's going to be an interesting discussion. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the panel discussion. And if you're following online, kindly, if you wish to ask a question, submit this using the Slido link on the conference platform. You will also see the Slido icon in the auditorium next to the main screen. Winston, I can imagine it's been an interesting afternoon for you. Has it been?
Thank you very much, Maggie. This session is quite important for us here in Barbados because we have this target of 100% renewables by 2030. And the technologies, the minerals that we're discussing today are going to be an important part of that transition. On my rooftop, I have a PV system. And they tell me that will last 25 years. But in 25 years, the question arises, what will we do with that system? How will we properly dispose of that system in 25 years? And that's one of the life cycle issues that I'm hoping to sort of pull out, to sort of tease out from the panelists today. So our first presentation will be given by Mr. Pascal Lafont. Mr. Lafont is the IEA General Counsel and Secretary to the IEA Board of Governors. His previous assignments were in Doha for the government of Qatar, in Brussels for the Esg Charter, and as a solicitor with Pincet Mousson, LLP in London and Hong Kong. I now invite Mr. Lafont to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Winston. Thank you, Maggie, for the kind words of introduction. Greetings from the IEA headquarters in Paris. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all, wherever you are, attending in person or remotely. Allow me to start by thanking the government of Barbados for its gracious invitation, as well as Untitled Commodities and IGF for co-hosting this very timely event. I salute my speakers today, Nikki and Michael. If we could have the first slide, please. Thank you. Before turning to our recent report on critical minerals, I wanted to take a short moment to introduce the IEA. As an historical matter, the IEA is an international organization based on a binding treaty, which was negotiated in the wake of the 1970 energy crisis, primarily to create a collective energy security mechanism. And I would like here to compare it with NATO, Article 5, for instance, which obliges NATO members to come to the rescue of one of its members if it is attacked the IEA provides exactly the same system in case of an emergency crisis, as we did, for instance, in the wake of the Hurricane Katrina in the US and other instances in the lifespan of the IEA. Now, under the treaty, under the IEA treaty, members agreed to assist each other in times of energy supply disruption, including by releasing strategic stocks of oil and by initiating demand restraint measures. Now, in addition, members have agreed to cooperate on energy data, to consult with local and international industry players, and to carry out peer reviews of each other's national energy policies and legislation. So it's a very tightly knit network of government experts around the world. Of course, since the 1970s, the concept of energy security has evolved significantly, as Maggie and Winston and other speakers have highlighted today. And although strategic oil stocks remain an important part of our platform, the IEA's activities now encompass gas security, electricity security, and progress on clean energy transitions as well. And it is in that context that our member governments have recently mandated us to expand our work on critical minerals. And earlier this year, we released for the first time a comprehensive report on this topic. If we could have the next slide, please. Thank you. I won't get too deep into the details regarding the IEA's scenarios and modeling behind this report. Other colleagues in the IEA, although my colleagues would be better placed to discuss the more technical aspects. But allow me to, just for our purposes today, to highlight the key point. Our analysis shows that achieving global climate goals will require a massive increase in mineral requirements for clean energy technologies. By 2040, overall mineral requirements would be between 4 and 6 times higher than the current level. And for certain minerals, growth will be even higher, as you can see on the right side of this slide. It varies depending on the precise strengths of climate policies and the technology pathway. But in a scenario compatible with the Paris Agreement, 2040 demand for lithium, for example, is more than 40 times higher than it is today. Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. There are many potential roadblocks that might hinder the magnitude of growth needed to meet global climate goals, including long lead times for new projects, very low diversity of supply for certain minerals, and technology development needs. For our part, the IEA has drawn on our long-standing leadership in energy security, as I highlighted earlier, to lay out a 6-point plan of action to help ensure that critical minerals will be able to contribute to clean energy transitions. Our 6 recommendations are listed here in front of you, but I'd like to highlight 2 of these points that may be particularly relevant to participants in today's forum. That's points 5 and 6. The need to mainstream higher ESG standards, E environment, S social and G governance, ESG standards, an area where all 3 letters have all equal importance, and to strengthen international collaboration between producers and consumers are key in our view. Next slide, please. Thank you. But before we discuss ESG, we should acknowledge the potential positive role that mineral wealth can play in many countries around the world. As the market for critical minerals grow, there is naturally a corresponding potential for the revenues generated to finance continued economic and social development. However, this comes with major risks for countries that rely on this wealth. As you can see, mineral exports represent an enormous share of the economy in many countries. For instance, in 23 African countries, minerals represent over 30% of exports. In these countries, the transparent management of mineral revenues would be advisable so that mineral extraction contributes to durable economic growth. Next slide, please. Now, we mentioned the ESG standards, and I would like to start with the E and the S of the ESG, environment and social. It will also be critical for all countries to step up efforts to tackle the environmental and social impacts of mineral developments. These include the risks described here in this table, such as climate emissions, local pollution, water use, worker safety and welfare, and human rights. Solutions to climate change can't work on the back of injustices or poor environmental performance further up the value chain. Suppliers have to do their due diligence to identify, assess, and mitigate these risks, and governments in producing countries can play a very important role here. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this brings me to the G of the equation, of the ESG equation, governance, and the role for international and regional coordination. An overarching international framework for dialogue and policy coordination among producers and consumers can play a very important role. And this is particularly true with respect to environmental and social issues. But there are also huge opportunities for governments to work together on mineral security issues. Looking at the existing landscape, many international initiatives have emerged in recent years to tackle various supply chain challenges. Multilateral efforts to enhance capacity building and knowledge sharing can address key resource gaps between countries. And despite many success stories, the proliferation of international initiatives increases the risk of duplication and inconsistency. A high-level forum for coordination could play a key role in standardizing environmental and social standards, while ensuring security of supply for consumers and outputs for producers. Across all these areas of potential collaboration, the IEA stands ready to work with governments and other stakeholders to facilitate dialogue and coordination in very close collaboration with other partners, including IGF, including the OECD and others. I thank you all very much for your attention. Over to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lafont. I think the key term that keeps coming up in all of these presentations over the last 2 days has been partnership. And Mr. Lafont sort of highlighted that as a key way of addressing some of the challenges that we're going to see emerging from the tremendous demand he's highlighted that we'll see over the next couple of years for these type of minerals. As an economist as well, I was sort of struck by his chart looking at how some of these countries are so dependent on the revenues earned from these minerals. And it harks back to this term that we use a lot in economics called Dutch disease. Helping these countries set up sovereign wealth funds is going to be a very important part of the transition over the next 20, 30 years as we utilize more of these minerals to transition away from fossil fuels. So thank you very much for that presentation, Mr. Lafont. Our second presentation will be given by Mrs. Nikki Black, Director of Environmental Stewardship and Social Progress, International Council on Mining and Metals, an international organization that brings together 28 mining metals companies from over 35 national and commodity mining associations to strengthen environmental and social performance and enhance mining's contribution to society. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And whilst Pascal and I have different starting points on this topic, our messages, as you will hear, are very, very much aligned and similar. So just to start by saying thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you today on this critical topic. At the International Council on Mining and Metals, we bring a third of the global mining sector together to work on improving and strengthening the sustainability, performance and contribution of mining. And the organization was founded on a belief that the mining and metals sector can be a powerful catalyst for long-term sustainable development. And the transformation of our global energy system could represent a new chapter in the story of how mining, when done responsibly, can create extraordinary opportunity for people and countries where the transition minerals and metals that Pascal highlighted are found. Now, at the same time, as demand for these minerals and metals is increasing, customers, investors, communities, and governments are asking for more assurance that assets, mining operations, are being run responsibly, that appropriate taxes and revenues are being paid, and ultimately that the environmental and social costs are worth it. These issues are front of mind in our work at ICMM, and that work is focused in three broad areas. Firstly, reducing the carbon footprint of the sector. We all agree there is an urgent need for a global response to the threat of climate change across all areas of society and the economy. We have a collective responsibility to support the goals of the Paris Agreement to reduce emissions and support a low carbon future. The impacts of mining and metals are multifaceted, while the minerals our members produce are essential to a low carbon transition. So we recognize that our operations and products also contribute to the problem of climate change, accounting for 10% of global emissions and potentially negatively impacting communities and ecosystems. ICMM members have made significant progress in mitigating emissions from the adoption of renewables, electrification, and operational efficiency, particularly in South America and in the Nordic countries, due to regional accessibility and competitive markets for decarbonisation options. 14 of 28 ICMM members, so a half of our membership, currently have GHG emissions reduction targets in place that are aiming for net zero by 2050. And the remainder vary in baseline year used, time frame, and whether they are considering a relative or an absolute reduction. And I echo Pascal in saying it's really in collective and collaborative action that some of the framing conditions or enabling factors that can be changed to deliver impact at scale. For example, mining vehicles account for, on average, 50% of the total direct emissions at a mine. That's 50% of Scope 1 emissions. At ICMM, we have launched a program called Innovation for Cleaner, Safer Vehicles, which brings together mining companies with original equipment manufacturers to make mobile mining vehicles that are safer and GHG emission-free. Another example of a recent collaboration is the one between Rio Tinto and Alcoa, both ICMM members, and Apple on producing emission-free aluminium. So my first key takeaway for our discussion here is collective and collaborative action is key to greening mining at scale. The second area of work or focus is working in collaboration with others to strengthen community resilience and to help ensure that transition is just. Last year, ICMM commenced its Skills for Our Common Future initiative. This is a long-term aspirational goal aiming to accelerate efforts to build new and strengthen existing skills, support economic participation for local communities who may otherwise be disadvantaged by the climate transition. The Skills Initiative supports ICMM's member companies in strengthening community resilience and local economic resilience through skills building and reskilling initiatives in the regions around their operations. It responds to a profound need, and we identified this need over several years of engaging with stakeholders around the world and potential partners. The need for communities where our members operate to be able to adapt and thrive through the disruptions of our rapidly changing world And these disruptions include the climate change energy transition, but also economic transitions, such as the adoption of new technology or the future of work, and mine closure. And thirdly, to help them adapt and thrive through disruptive or significant events, such as natural disasters, the global pandemic, political upheavals. So what will this initiative do? It will be delivered through partnerships that leverage the resources of actors at global, national, and local levels to identify best practices and then catalyze the adoption of effective skills planning and training approaches at scale. It's aiming to catalyze skills building partnerships in mining communities around the world. It will also look to draw on the sector's long experience of working with local communities to help inform the best approach, taking into consideration different cultures, geographies, economic and social conditions, and local situations. The aim is for the initiative to be developed and implemented in a way that every mining asset within ICMM's membership, that's currently more than 650 mine sites in more than 50 countries, will be able to participate. And it will run over the next 15 years, which we think is a necessarily long runway to understand and hope to effect lasting positive change. Through the initiative, ICMM aims to support a step change in the way mining contributes to communities through a deeper understanding of what makes those communities resilient and bringing the partners, resources, and sustained focus needed to equip them with the skills to thrive through this period of extraordinary disruption. So my second key takeaway for our discussion here is that the transition will not happen or be successful if the impacts on people are not at the fore. The third area of focus is better understanding the enabling factors necessary for resource governance to result in social progress in host countries. And this speaks directly to the point that Pascal raised. I began by saying that mining can be a powerful catalyst for long-term sustainable development. At ICMM, we work to try and understand the conditions under which this happens, to help inform action by ourselves and others to more fully harness the benefits mining can bring. We recently released a significant piece of research into the contribution mining can make to sustainable development and the importance of effective natural resource governance in helping to translate natural resources into social progress in host countries. The report's called Social Progress in Mining-Dependent Countries, Analysing the Role of Resource Governance in Delivering the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The study was robust and comprehensive. It analysed 41 social metrics grouped under 12 relevant SDGs across the last 23 years. Asking the question, do countries with stronger resource governance, better frameworks that are implemented around mineral resource governance and more broadly in an enabling environment, do those countries with stronger natural mineral resource governance see better social progress, richer, wealthier, healthier, longer-lived citizens? Most strikingly, what we found is that in most mining-dependent countries, most of them continue to close the socioeconomic performance gap with non-resource dependent countries. This is a bit of a counterpoint to the resource curse, a widely held perception that mining is likely to impede the economic and social progress of host populations. But critically, and this reinforces Pascal's point, the research found that governance matters. The higher the quality of governance, the more likely it is that the citizens of a mining-dependent country will be healthier, wealthier, and better educated over time. The research also confirms that social progress tends to have long gestation periods. You can develop mining laws, but they take time to deliver on social progress and social outcomes, and they have to be effectively implemented. Not enough to have them on the books, the statute books, they have to be enforceable and enforced. Finally, it found that a stable enabling environment has the strongest positive relationship with good socioeconomic outcomes. What that means is that countries that are more peaceful, that have lower levels of corruption, that have a vocal and active civil society with sufficient civic space are better able to translate natural resources into social progress. So the final takeaway for our discussion here is that greening mining for the energy transition is not just about mining companies or purely green issues. It's about accelerating action on effective mineral resource governance, accountable, transparent, participatory, to ensure that the money mobilized for the green transition goes to where it's meant to go and is enabled to deliver the best possible outcome for the citizens of those countries where critical minerals and metals will be found. So in sum, greening mining for a green economy requires collective and collaborative action, with people at the fore and attention to strengthening governance frameworks to harness mining for social progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Mrs. Black. I think the theme that I'm going to pull out from today's session again is the whole notion of collaborative action. Because from this presentation, and again from Pascal's presentation as well, this seems to be a key part of addressing this issue of minerals and the demand for these minerals going forward into the future. I particularly like the link between helping communities to adapt to the tremendous demand for these minerals. And it works to look at this issue of resilience, because adaptation is also helping to build resilience in these communities as well. So the focus on communities is also quite important. And then also the notion that governance matters. I mean, lots of economic research has pointed to this as being a very important part of the growth process. So I'm very glad to see this coming out as well when we're talking about minerals as well. So thank you very much for that presentation again, Mrs. Black. So I'm going to go over to my Geneva studio, again, from Bridgetown to Barbados, for Maggie to introduce the next speaker.
Winston, I'm going to pick out something from the two presentations as well that is very crucial, and that's partnerships. I think when all of them were presenting, they mentioned that a couple of times, which brings me to our next speaker here. It would be nice to, to get a perspective from the private sector, because as they emphasize some of these things, I kept on thinking, can't wait for my next panelist to hear what he has to say. So our final speaker from Geneva will be Mr. Michael Wumser, the Deputy CEO of the Norge Mining. He's an economist and entrepreneur, but also advises on the finances and strategic direction of the company. He has worked for Citibank Zurich and has held senior positions at multinational financial institutions in New York and Frankfurt. I can't just read his entire CV today, but I think we will learn more from the presentation. You have the floor.
So, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this platform. Thank you also to the government of Barbados for making this happen. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Michael Wurmser. I'm the founder and deputy CEO of Norgay Mining. I'm honored to talk to you today about the topic of green mining. Two words that until relatively recently would have constituted a paradox. And yet, these days, green mining is a reality, one that's integral to our clean energy transition. So before I go into more on that, let me give you a brief snapshot of Norgay Mining. The very reason Norgay Mining, an Anglo-Norwegian Swiss natural resources company, exists is because we knew that Norway was sitting on large untapped reserves of phosphate, titanium-bearing ilmenite, and vanadium, thanks to earlier studies carried out by the Norwegian Geological Survey, NGU. But not a lot was done about it then, as Norway focused its efforts on its buoyant oil and gas and fishery industries. Since we began our own investigations in southern Norway in early 2018, we now understand that there are large deposits of vanadium, titanium, and phosphate, all EU critical raw materials, not just important to Europe, but important to the world. With an announcement within 3 months of 2 world-class mineral resource estimates reflecting only about 8.5% of our total ore body potential. EU critical, as you know, because they have high economic importance, but also high supply risk. So, how is Norge Mining a green mining company? Well, the short answer is that fighting climate change is at the heart of everything we do. Being a pioneer, we have made a firm commitment to adhere to the ESG criteria and to 7 UN Sustainable Development Goals already 3 years ago. But it all starts with the critical raw materials themselves. As we all know, the transition from fossil fuels to green energy can only take place if we expand the use of renewables. But this cannot take place without massive energy storage capabilities. It's clear that we need more industrial scale storage solutions. Put simply, there will be no transition to green energy without storage solutions. And there will be no storage solutions without critical raw materials. So vanadium is likely, therefore, to become more pivotal. Vanadium redox flow batteries are scalable, safe, don't degrade, and have infinite life cycles, making them perfect powerhouses to store vast amounts of renewable energy. Titanium is already an essential component in a number of renewable energy systems applications. Lightweight, with extraordinary strength and anti-corrosive. These characteristics will gain in importance with an increase in offshore wind installations. Then there's phosphate, a fertilizer ingredient that helps feed our expanding population and, if used appropriately, provides a more environmental friendly solution to nitrogen-based ones. Nitrogen is a long-lived greenhouse gas that is almost 300 times more potent than CO2 over a 100-year period. It is the 3rd largest contributor to climate change after CO2 and methane. The world's use of nitrogen fertilizers for food production could threaten efforts to keep global warming below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. We also focus on minimizing our environmental impact, and we will strive for zero carbon mining. At present, the mining industry contributes to 2 to 3% of global CO2 emissions. We want to be part of a new wave of decarbonized operations that aren't contributing to these damaging statistics. To achieve a 1.5 degrees centigrade climate change target by 2050, the mining industry will need to reduce direct CO2 emissions to 0, according to a McKinsey report. This will involve sustainable sourcing, sustainable fuels and drivetrains, as well as green electricity. On that note, we will reduce our carbon footprint as much as possible by deploying mine machinery that runs on renewable energy and hydrogen. Our proximity to European industrial and clean tech centers will also ensure short transportation distances and hence reduce the CO2 footprint. And we will rely on cutting-edge innovation and technology for all our operations, as demonstrated already with our use of aerial magnetic surveys and heli-rigs to drill for core samples, all to minimize land disruption. Our extraction methods are and will continue to be chemical-free, ensuring that there's no soil contamination, and wherever possible, any waste material will be repurposed. We have already identified diversified industries and markets where it will be in high demand. So what's more, we will be investing in renaturation programs throughout our time in Norway. Then on to our message to fellow colleagues in the mining industry. At Norge Mining, we are firm believers that responsible mining offers tremendous opportunities and competitive advantages. The global landscape is rapidly changing for miners, particularly from the regulatory perspective in key demand centers like Europe and the United States, where sustainability considerations are increasingly being given priority. Adapting sustainable practices now will ensure that miners have access to the markets of tomorrow. Early adopters can benefit from a first-mover advantage to stay ahead. Responsible mining also enhances local public acceptance by improving working conditions and lessening the immediate environmental impact while, of course, mitigating global climate change. Norway is an example of how this can be done successfully. And finally, I'd like to tell you about what Norgay mining can do for miners in developing states. This is also a very important point. Firstly, we would like to encourage other miners by demonstrating that sustainable mining is both possible and profitable, and that green mining is a viable reality, not the paradox I mentioned. Secondly, we can share our know-how to reduce mining challenges in these states in terms of safety, efficiency, mitigating environmental damage, and so on. Thirdly, by encouraging sustainable mining practices globally, we believe that we can increasingly also encourage off-takers in our industry. Many of these companies are strong consumer-facing brands, which can in turn also help drive change up their supply chains, and in doing so engage broader ecosystem. So finally, demand for critical raw materials will quadruple to meet Paris Agreement targets by 2050, and there are warnings of a supply crisis ahead. Critical raw materials are fast becoming pawns in strategic and geopolitical power struggles and are the latest frontier of geo-economic rivalry between China and the US, and the EU as well. It's clear that green mining that minimizes environmental impact and maximizes economic potential is needed more than ever before. The mining sector is an enabler of the clean energy transition and a more circular economy. And at Norgay Mining, we take our responsibilities in relation to that very seriously. Thank you so much for your attention, and I welcome any question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wurmser. I think you've sort of highlighted and the work your company is doing sort of generates a double dividend for the world economy, because not only are you helping with the transition to renewable energies, also working to reduce the outputs of CO2 emissions as well, which is beneficial for the global economy. I was also quite interested by your comments in relation to the renaturalization process as well. So I'm sure that colleagues online will have lots of questions. Remember, you can post your questions online using the Slido link. I'm going to go straight to Slido because we have a number of questions on Slido now. So the first question from our online audience is to you, Mrs. Black, and you, Mr. Lafont. It says here, how can we ensure both corporate responsibility and good governance? According to Mrs. Black and Mr. Lafont, presentations both appear to be crucial to both environmental and social responsibility mining, to have both environmental and social responsibility in mining. My apologies. So, Mrs. Black, do you want to first tackle that question?
Certainly, thank you. I think it depends who you are and where you're sitting. I think if you're a government, it's looking for effective legislation and frameworks and working with industry to understand where leading practice is, what their experience is elsewhere, and how to join it up. Michael gave some really inspiring, solid examples of what mining can transfer from different jurisdictions and how things are done. In terms of if you're a company, I think it's understanding that this is the direction of travel. It will soon no longer be possible to hire the employees, the workers with the skills you need to operate current mines or the mines of the future, which may be prompted by new technology to reduce emissions. those people may not want to work for you. Skills are more transferable. They'd rather go work in manufacturing or entertainment or technology and the tech sector. Securing the talent you need, having access to the capital you need, being able to access the ore body that you need. Permission to mine, permission to market, these will all be increasingly dependent on how well you can demonstrate corporate responsibility, responsible mining, and it's working in collaboration with government and others that we can really strengthen the sector, can support governments in strengthening the frameworks that really enable responsible mining at scale.
Mr. Lafont? Mr. Lafont?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, all right. Thank you. Grateful for the question, and very interesting. You put a panel of varied participants. Both Nikki and Michael represent the industry, obviously, and I'm more from the government side of things. And I think what is very important from our perspective, from our government's perspective, is that we try to make sure that they understand that they can facilitate standardization and require due diligence. I think the due diligence dimension of the process is essential. But I would also tend to agree with Nikki and Michael in his presentation, where the industry, the private sectors, have a vital role to play in terms of capacity building. Now, we know that Michael is operating in a very tight legal environment in Europe or Norway, with very high ESG standards, very costly for the operation. And I think it's very important that a company like Norge or Nikki's members bring these standards to other countries so that it slowly permeates the practice in countries where the legislation, where the regulations are less exacting. Over to you, Winston. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Womser, I'm going to pose this question to you. The question that I have for you is, we talked about commodities such as oil going stranded in previous sessions. And can that also be the case for metals because of technological innovation?
I'm not sure if I understood your question because it broke up here on the thing. Can you repeat, please?
Oh, sure. Yes, please, of course. We spoke about commodities such as oil being stranded in the previous session, so oil-based plants or fossil fuel-based plants being stranded in the previous session. Can that also be the case for minerals because of technological innovation?
Okay, thank you for the question. No, I don't think so. I mean, these are various facets that we have. I mean, we have various minerals on our deposit. For instance, one is phosphate. Phosphate is, first of all, very important to the food security of this planet. It is a part for the fertilizer industry, and fertilizer industry equals to food security. So I'm not sure if you can replace fertilizer, which is a natural mineral. I mean, for sure there will be possibilities and innovations, but I don't think that you will be able to for instance, replace something like that. The next thing is, well, about batteries. For instance, there's vanadium, which we have, and phosphate also is being used in batteries. Of course, there will be technologies, but in order to replace these kind of ingredients in batteries, you need to find out a new source of energy. How can you move a car, an airplane? I mean, at the moment it's all fossil, but there are other technologies probably that will evolve. But until then, you need batteries to storage the energy, the electricity, also renewable energy, wind, solar. I mean, of course, there will be technologies. There will be technologies where you can produce energy from nuclear. I don't know, but how to replace solar and wind, and for this you need batteries. You cannot storage wind and solar energy in the air. You need batteries for that. So I mean, the technology will of course improve, and there will be other ingredients, other possibilities, like that may replace lithium. But also then, if you replace a technology by another, it must be also sustainably makeable. So that is also an important point. I mean, you cannot just replace one technology and then, you know, we have to bear in mind it must be also sustainable and run according to the SDGs and the ESG rules. Yeah. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Wurmser. I have another question for you. I think Slido and the audience online really enjoyed your presentation. They really enjoyed all of the presentations. This question to you, Michael, is technological innovation is key to a smooth transition towards greener energies. But we want this transition to occur also in developing countries. Technology transfer will also be very important, and technology transfer at a low cost. What could be the role of private firms such as Norge Capital in this process?
Thank you for that question. Okay, I mean, of course, you want to include developing countries in the transition. You cannot just left them alone. I mean, you cannot just say, okay, you're fossil fuel. You're a fossil producer of crude oil and gas, and no, you have to include all of them. You have to involve them in the whole technological process. For instance, Africa, it was mentioned before in one of the previous sessions. Africa has not only oil and gas. First of all, Africa has also minerals that are vital to the transformation from fossil into renewable energy. And Africa has lots of solar power. Africa has also lots of hydropower, wind. So I think we should collaborate with developing countries, not try to lecture them or try to patronize, but to work together on the same level, I believe, organizing workshops or whatever, and involve them in your technology. I think that will bring all together. I think, you know, if countries collaborate and have all the same target, I think you can achieve much more than just to single them out and say, well, you know, the way you protect your environment is such and such, so and you have only oil and gas. That's wrong. We have to include them. And I mean, a company like ours would be very happy to help and support developing countries to detect other possibilities which they have. I mean, other possibilities like minerals for battery, for instance, or also to help them to become more efficient on by using solar energy or wind power, for instance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. I'm going to go back over to you, Pascal. There is a question again from the online audience. What is happening in research and development in battery technology, both in terms of getting lower costs and using other materials besides lithium?
Winston, I'm going to have to disappoint you and your audience, but I'm only a lawyer. And so my response is going to be, I hope, not too loyally. You could note that from a government perspective, governments play an enormously important role in technology development, both in developing clean energy technologies and also in mining technologies to improve safety and efficiency and standards. We, the IEA, our 30 member governments, have recommended that governments collaborate closely on research and development on clean energy technologies, safer, cleaner mining technologies, and metal recycling. So this is something that we've been asked to do and mandated to do by governments, and that's our recommendation. And obviously the organization, the IEA has technology programs on these particular issues and collaborative platforms, and I would be very happy to share details with you, to share with your audience, Winston, later on this particular point. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Pascal. Well, we're all only something. I'm only an economist as well, so being a lawyer is quite a good thing to be. So Maggie, I'm going to go over to you for some questions from the floor.
Thanks, Winston. I should add on that, I'm only a moderator as well, but it's interesting to hear a few things really being reiterated, like collective efforts, collaborations, partnerships, research and development. And I want to bring in Dr. Janvier. He's been listening to this conversation from the very beginning, and of course it's a continuation of what we had in the morning, afternoon session, or morning, depending on where you're watching from. Janvier, what are your thoughts listening to the speakers this afternoon?
Thank you, moderator. My thoughts are that we are discussing a very important issue, the green transition and the minerals fueling it. I think it's a reality that needs to be discussed, and I'm going to pick two things just to highlight. One is really to add on to what Michael just said about involving developing countries. We all know that minerals such as cobalt, most of it is found in Congo, DR Congo, lithium, Chile, Bolivia, manganese, Gabon, graphite, South Africa. So all these are developing countries. So how do we find a way of working with these countries? I liked the term you used, not a patronizing way, but a way really of equal kind of partnerships where you sit together at the table and you debate these issues in the interest of every party and see how to move forward. One thing I remember, I had a private discussion with Michael. Why wouldn't, for example, batteries be manufactured in those countries, electric batteries? Why wouldn't we see Congo manufacturing electric batteries? Because cobalt, most of the cobalt traded around the world, it comes from that country. Why? Okay. So why wouldn't we change our thinking and look at things in a very different way than the way we've been doing? So I think it's a discussion that we are starting here. I think it will continue, and I hope we'll be able to really deepen this kind of issues. The second thing is just a question I see here on what could be the role of the multilateral trading system in securing access to minerals crucial to green energies. Well, it's not addressed to me because I'm not a speaker, but since no one has so far handled it, let me just try to say a couple of words about it, because it's a question that I had to address in another setting. I think it is true that in reality, the multilateral trading system is not as smooth as it should be. Things are predicated on a smooth operation of trade, where there are no frictions, where there are no barriers, tariff barriers or non-tariff barriers. But we know the reality is not that way. We know sometimes countries impose export ban, for example. And when that happens, there are entire industries that might be hurt, because that has happened before. So again, this call again to review the way we trade, to review the way we agree among ourselves as nations, so that if we really want a multilateral trading system that can be used to procure these crucial ingredients, yes, but let's mean it. And meaning it this is a political question, of course. It goes beyond economics. When these things happen, usually these are, it becomes a political issue. So that's why when you see countries like the ones I just mentioned that have these critical raw materials, how do they leverage? Well, maybe leverage is not the right word. How do they get advantage, maximum advantage from these commodities? Because what we know now is when you go to, let me use copper, even though it's probably not as critical as the other materials. We know a country like Zambia has been exporting copper for more than 50 years. But when you look at the conditions in the country or how much they actually get out of the copper, it's peanuts relative to how much they could get out of it if they were able to use copper to actually produce something else, to produce more value-added products. So how can we encourage countries that have critical materials to use this position to, to diversify their economies, because we were talking about that in the previous session, to actually diversify their economies, to improve the well-being of their populations. I think this is the critical discussion that we need to have. We're talking about SDGs. How can we use this to improve on the SDG level? So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zanvia. And of course, just to add on that, that's where we have panelists like Michael to chip in. Obviously, we've seen a bit of progress in some countries that have added value to their minerals. Reminds me of a famous quote that I hate using, the resource curse. And I just want to put it out there that it could be turned around and, come to a point where we forge partnerships, like we've mentioned, work together, collective efforts, something that has been also emphasized continuously during the conversations. But I want to hand back to Winston in Barbados. Winston, you've had the remarks from Dr. Janvier. Interestingly, a lot of developing countries are also resource-rich countries. They have lots of resources, enormous. And yet still the benefits are very minimal.
One of the things that popped up in the discussion is the whole, well, two things, the whole notion of collaborative advantages. Back in the day, maybe back in the 60s, we used to talk about competitive advantages for economies, but we are increasingly realizing that if we're going to pull these developing countries forward, we're going to have to speak more about collaborative advantages and helping them along the way as well. And then secondly, the issue of governance, how really important this will be in helping these sort of resource-rich countries. Because once you have such a large part of your economy, you're talking about 60–70% of your economy, just based on one particular sector, you're going to have to speak about the issue of governance. And that also came up very strongly today, Maggie. So I'm going to now return back to the panelists, and I'm going to invite each of the panelists, starting first with Mr. Lafont, to give their closing thoughts.
Thank you very much, Winston. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, I can.
Winston?
Yes, we can, Mr. Lafont. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. If you allow me, just before I share some very simple points in conclusion, just to go back to if you allow me, to go back to the point on the developing world. There is obviously enormous tension between the desire to develop local technology, manufacturing, and the trade system. But there are approaches, and we've been working on them, there are approaches to foster local industries that don't run afoul of the trade system. And here, and I don't know whether we have anyone from Chile in the audience, but Chile is a very interesting example here where Chile has used mining income to fund technology innovation funds. And I would invite the audience to get in touch with me so that we can put you in touch with the Chilean government for capacity building if there is any interest here. Now, the Chilean example may not work for all countries, but it's an example of how we need to work together with these countries to foster these industries in ways that avoid these tensions and these disputes. Thank you very much, Winston, for allowing me to just say a few words on this. 2 points in conclusion. My first point is about what Dr. Janvier from UNCTAD said. I think he used a very important word, equal partnership. I would add 2 more adjectives, if you don't mind. I would say representative and inclusive. And why do I say that? It's because I think we need to learn from experiences in the past. I've heard in some corner of our constituency or other countries, the word OMEC, not OPEC, but OMEC, which is an organization of mineral exporting countries. And I sincerely hope that we don't fall into the trap, the political trap of polarization. I think we've all learned from lessons from the past, whether good or bad. And we need to work through an equal partnership, an inclusive partnership with producers, with consumers, with industry, with NGOs, with civil society, with everyone around the table. It's going to be very hard, very difficult, because the interests are vastly diverging, but it is the way forward. It is the way forward. And this was my first point. My second conclusion, Winston, if I may, is to emphasize the role of industry, both to Nikki's members, and to Norgay and Michael. Independent of legal requirements, the industry standardization can improve global standards. And it is our role, governments or international organizations or associations such as Nikki's, to make sure that the private sector understands their role in that pursuit of ESG. Thank you, Winston.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Lafont. Now I'm going to invite Mrs. Nikki Black to offer a final comment.
Thank you, Winston, and thank you once again to the Government of Barbados, UNCTAD, and all of you for joining this fascinating discussion today. I would make 2 points. One is to pick up on Pascal's call for industry engagement on standards that allow the sector to both know and show that it is operating responsibly. At ICMM, we have developed over the last several years a set of mining principles and performance expectations. So these are a set of 37 performance expectations that can be independently verified and assured at site. So they are a framework for assessing responsible mining management standards at a site level, and ICMM members have committed to disclose those results progressively over time. So we're firm believers in the importance of disclosure and transparency, and it's part, as we look ahead, there has been a lot of focus on the consolidation of ESG reporting standards, of frameworks. There is a thicket of different standards and approaches, and it can be quite difficult to cut through the noise to really understand what performance currently is at a site and to look to comparability. So to say we fully echo that call for a greater focus on standards. We're alive to the a desire to cut through the noise, have a clearest framework to support disclosure and engagement. I think the second theme from this conversation I'd pick up to close on is really the importance of collaboration. ICMM brings together a third of global mining to work on a pre-competitive basis together, to collaborate, to identify membership commitments and strengthen performance against those commitments, but then engage across the whole sector with guidance, with knowledge shares, communicating in platforms such as this. But really almost the more important part is the engagement that the platform of ICMM enables with other stakeholders, and the ability to then engage as a collective with other collectives. So Pascal started with a list of organizations at the international level working on these issues and suggesting there may be a way of a sort of higher organizing framework or organization to oversee them or coordinate them. We work with almost all of those organizations. So whether it's the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the Intergovernmental Forum on Mines, Minerals, Metals, Sustainable Development, OECD, it's really about informing and engaging and understanding where the leading edge of thought and practice is, and being a responsible partner in helping enable the right direction of travel. And it's really, my final reflection is it's in those platforms which feel often so far from the point of impact. It can feel a million miles away from a mining community in the Mongolian desert or from sub-Saharan Africa and the halls of the Palais des Nations where you are now. But it is absolutely the coordination and engagement of those organizations which in some ways can provide a more level playing field for capacity building. So EITI, the IGF, very focused on these issues around responsible mining, the green transition, the nature crisis, and these interconnected crises that we all need to engage with and respond to really support the green transition with green mining. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Nikki Black. I would love to invite the Deputy CEO for Norgay Mining, Mr. Michael Wurmser, for your closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Okay, in the last couple of months, we have seen lots of statements from the car manufacturers, from the car industry, namely in Germany, where each one has said, by 2030 or 2032, we only will produce cars with batteries, no more fuel cars that are fueled with fossil energy. You have in the United States, you have the Biden administration that has committed by 2030, 50% of the cars will be produced, will be cars with battery-driven cars, EV cars. Then there was this article on the FTs from Toyota. Toyota invests 16.5 billion into battery technology, battery manufacturing. So, I mean, the whole world has now taken this decision. This is basically a one-way, no-go-back decision. This is like a point of no return. That means they have committed to something. Now, I'm asking, where are all these minerals coming from? I mean, no, they didn't finish the thought, but I mean, it's good that we do that. That brings me to the next point. I mean, you have a gigafactory in Berlin financed by Tesla. Batteries, very nice, phosphate lithium iron batteries. Where do they buy the raw materials from? They ship it in from China or from Russia. I mean, why do they not build the factories, for instance, where the minerals are in the ground? That makes much more sense, and that brings me back also now to developing countries, for instance, Africa. You have raw materials in the ground. So why don't you put battery hubs or energy hubs in these countries? You only take you take the minerals out of the ground and you have the manufacturing on the soil. I mean, there's no point to build factories and again to start producing CO2 footprint, which goes through the roof because you transport minerals from China to Europe. Doesn't make sense. So I think we have to develop this thought and be creative, and again involve also developing countries. Where are these minerals? Can we maybe construct these battery manufacturing facilities exactly right there where those minerals are? This makes much more sense, because there you also do something for the climate. And I want just to close with one thing, which is one sentence, which is, I think, very, very important. And as always, this chased me for the last, since I'm involved with Norgay mining. The protection of the climate and the environment begins where you dig the stuff out of the ground, in the beginning of the value chain. There you have the biggest leverage and the biggest impact if you want to save the climate and if you want to save the environment. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that. I want to close by thanking all of the presenters here today. I think we had another really fascinating session today, looking at the issue of these minerals that would really be an important part of the green transition in the future. So I want to hand over now to my co-moderator, Maggie in Geneva.
Thank you very much, Winston, and to all our panelists. I think I have one word to not one, from your entire presentation, and this is for me crucial, especially to the private sector or even corporations, that sustainable green mining is still profitable. Because the question usually is, it's about profits, you know, where's the money? And it's interesting to hear this over and over again, that, you know, you can still make money, you can still be profitable, even, you know, even going that way. So that brings us to the end of this fascinating session. Thank you very much. And we're still continuing. We're still building onto this, but that's tomorrow. We will have a final day of this Commodities Forum, which will feature a high-level roundtable to discuss strengthening resilience in commodity-dependent countries. The panelists will discuss the lessons that could be drawn from the current COVID-19 pandemic and the policy responses needed to allow a sustained and sustainable recovery. Of course, there is so much that has happened, you know, drop in prices, closed economies. We can go on and on and on. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. So much uncertainty, but we have to find ways to remain resilient and adapt. So this panel will also address the question of resilience in these economies, as well as the role of international corporations in strengthening it or supporting and helping the countries. And thanks for keeping up with us and for your input, the questions that you kept sending in. And again, I wish you a very wonderful evening, wonderful afternoon, and a very good morning from wherever you're watching from. Thanks, and see you tomorrow.
Out of crisis and catastrophe comes opportunity, yeah, for real change in the world economy, to reduce vulnerability and inequality. So we coming together virtually to expand opportunities for developing countries. At UNCTAD 15, we're solving trade issues, youth issues, and gender issues too. Civil society and creative industries are part of the call to bring prosperity for all. Small island, big ideas, much more than the beach. Small country, big reach, touching the world virtually. We might be small, but proud people standing tall. Creative and hardworking, we bring Barbados to you. If you can't come to Barbados, we bring Barbados to you. If you can't fly to Barbados, we take Barbados to you. If you can't get to Barbados, we get Barbados to you.